Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this special interview. Today we have a returning guest to the show, Rob Kirby of Kirby Analytics, located at kirbyanalytics.com. And I got to tell you, everybody's getting excited right now. People are getting excited that there's another round of fiscal stimulus supposedly coming. People are getting excited that the gold and silver market manipulation is supposedly coming to an end. And people are getting excited that the recovery has supposedly begun. But I'm getting excited because we got Rob Kirby back on the show here in early October, and we're going to pick his brain. We're going to find out what's really going on. Rob, I'd like to thank you for joining us again on Silver Doctors.
Paul, pleasure to be with you again.
Now, Rob, you know, the last time we spoke was back in early July, and you said something on that interview that stuck with me to this day, and it continues to stick with me to this day. And I'm going to paraphrase you now, so please excuse me if I mix up the exact words that you said. But you said, isn't it interesting how, you know, whenever the U.S. government has some sort of national emergency or national security thing or some sort of military strike, there's always money for that. But then you said, whenever it comes to money for the people, they just can't seem to agree and they can't seem to come up with the money from anywhere. So, you know, Rob, just as we start out here this interview today, I'd like to get your assessment on the monetary and fiscal situation here at the start of October.
Well, let's just say, Paul, the amount of money that's actually being printed far exceeds what the government in your country admits that they're printing. So the keeper of monetary aggregates in America is the St. Louis Federal Reserve, and the numbers that they publish basically reflect what the Fed's official balance sheet is composed of. My contention is, and has been for a very long time, that the true amount of money being printed or created is far in excess of what is admitted. And the place where the money is being created, in my view at least, stems from the research and work done by Dr. Mark Skidmore at Michigan State University and Catherine Austin Fitts, ex-Undersecretary of HUD, Housing and Urban Development. And Skidmore's work in particular shows that the churn that's occurring in government accounts, and specifically in government retirement accounts and the Social Security trust accounts, is off the wall and off the charts. When you see a retirement account that contains $32 billion in retirement assets having a churn of $12 trillion in 12 months, something like that smells worse than a skunk in a trunk. And it is brutal. And what's going on in any account that claims to be retirement funds that's being churned to the tune of 32 billion in assets having a turnover of 12 trillion in a year. Let's just say what's going on there isn't management of retirement accounts. And it reeks of impropriety, it reeks of fraud, and nobody wants to ask any questions, and thus nobody gives answers. So that's where we are. It's a colossal fraud, and this is not something that Dr. Skidmore dreamed up on his own, or that I dreamed up on my own. This is using government numbers. These are the government numbers. They tell us that they're turning over and that they have the churn in these accounts of this magnitude. And let's just say that is not the way retirement assets are managed. Period. End of story. They're not managed that way. Anybody who is a money manager who would try to have that kind of a turnover with retirement assets, they'd be fired on the spot. It just doesn't happen that way. So you know, you can use your imagination and try to figure out if you're inclined to do so. I mean, it's anyway, when something is that obviously crazy big, I mean, all you can do is use your imagination. And I mean, I mean, I've got a reasonably good imagination. I have a pretty good idea what they're doing. They're creating money out of securities, and very likely in the Treasury complex. There's off book debt. There's off book securities. These guys are literally creating money out of thin air, and it's going on with reckless abandon, and nobody wants to say stop. This isn't right, but it isn't right, and you can ignore what's going on. I guess to a point you can ignore it indefinitely, but you can't ignore the repercussions of ignoring it indefinitely, and the repercussions of all of this, the upshot of it all. We have distortions in our capital markets. We have interest rates at zero when they shouldn't be, despite record issuance of debt, acknowledged debt. We have a stock market where the fundamentals, the economy, half of the economy is shut down, and we have stock market at record prices. We have suppression of precious metals, which is an extremely expensive undertaking. Wonder where they get the money? It's from this money mill I just spoke of. That's where the money's coming from. And of course, any military operation that anyone can conceive of, there's loads of money for that. There's just no money left over for things like Medicare. There's no money left over for social programs, because of course, when everyone speaks of social programs and things for the common people, money's tight. Okay, money's tight, but money's never tight when one contemplates which country we're going to invade next, or where we're going to move the Fifth Fleet from or to, or how many troops need to be deployed. There's always money for that. There's never a question about whether the Treasury has enough dollars, to engage in anything militarily. So that's the world we live in, and it's becoming. I'm going to say it's becoming more obscene by the day, because the money continues to be printed. And the one thing we do know, if you look at a growth curve of any fiat money regime, as pointed out in the crash course, which was produced by Chris Martinson back in 2009, and it's a video series. You can go to his site, peakprosperity.com, and watch the videos, audio video expose on. It's called the crash course, it explains the growth life cycle of fiat money, of any fiat money regime with compound interest, and you see what happens to any fiat money regime in its life cycle, and how its growth is dictated, that it vectors up, and it literally goes vertical. We are on the vertical part of the money growth curve now. The amount of money being created, I'm going to say, is tens of trillions more per year than what is acknowledged. This is dark money. Okay, it's not acknowledged to exist, but it does exist. They try to keep it siloed, but they can't keep it all siloed. Their problem is, Paul, they don't know where to put the money. They have so much of it. And what they don't want to do is they don't want to have that money bleeding into the economy at large, where it would create, or even if it was acknowledged to exist, it would create an instantaneous hyperinflationary event. And this is what monetary authorities are loath to allow to happen. So this has to be kept under wraps. It has to be kept largely hidden, but it shows its it shows its existence by virtue of a bond market with rates at zero across the curve, precious metals prices being suppressed, currencies are manipulated incredibly, and the stock market is goosed beyond belief. But I mean, when one thinks about this, and these are the ills of central banking. The biggest equity player probably in the world, probably at least acknowledged equity player in the world, is probably the Swiss National Bank. What is a national bank of any country being one of the biggest equity holders on the planet? What's up with that? Is that in the mission statement of central banking, that central banks will own everything? Because that's where humanity is headed. We've been on that course for a long time. And frankly, I find it appalling. I think it's a disgrace that this entitled elitist group, this cabal of money people, believe that they have the right to own and possess everything that man has ever created, anything of value that man has ever created. I find it just utterly appalling. So that's where I come from. Anyway, I'm disgusted with it.
And it's interesting because I see the points there about, I would agree with that they don't want that money getting out because then that's that instant hyperinflationary event. And I also think back, I was wrong about this. I thought there was going to be another round. They call it I think it's the fourth round now in September, because I kept watching the Treasury's daily balance, and it was always like 1.5 trillion. I was like, well, they still have time before the end of the fiscal year. Well, that came and passed. Plus, Mnuchin said they were wanting to get it out in August to the people, the economic impact payments. But my point is this, when it comes down to getting it to move, could it be possible that it comes from like the business angle? Because now we're starting to hear things like Disney's laying off 28,000 people. The airlines are about to lay off massive amounts of people, and they can do that starting today. And then also, record numbers of store closures and bankruptcies in the first half of 2020. So is it possible that it's going to have to be business to push the fiscal side of things to get it moving for this next round? Or did any of the stuff I just said make any sense at all there, Rob?
Well, I mean, Paul, what you are mixing is you're mixing reality with the unreal world of money creation. I mean, you're speaking of mass layoffs. You just spoke of the economy being in a crippled state, in that layoffs are occurring wholesale. This is the latest round of layoffs. Paul, let's think about the tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people that lost their jobs when the economy was first locked down, that haven't gone back to work. I mean, we're talking the hospitality industry. It's on its back. Hotels, motels they're vacant. They don't have anybody staying at their places. Restaurants are either shuttered or operating at a fraction of their capacity. Airlines are literally on their back. The travel industry, the tourism industry is on its back. And here we are speaking of the latest round of layoffs at Disney in California and Florida. I mean, it's unbelievable that yet we have stock market at record highs. I mean, go figure. If you had told somebody 2 years ago that half the economy would be shut down, but the stock market would be making new all-time highs, most people would have laughed at you. They might have said go see a doctor. But yet here we are, interest rates at zero, record issuance of new debt, acknowledged new debt, and the dollar. How much lipstick can you put on a pig? Because that's the dollar. Okay, it is a sow with lipstick applied very liberally, and that's where we are. So mainstream propagandists will say that that's the strong dollar. No, that's a pig with lipstick on. Okay, it's not a strong dollar. It's a pig wearing lipstick. So don't confuse pigs with lipstick with strong currencies, because the dollar is not strong. The dollar is being printed into oblivion, and oblivion is where the dollar will end up, because you can't print that much money and have a currency maintain its purchasing power. And the dollar will not maintain its purchasing power. And this is the threat of the dollar losing its reserve currency status, because it's being printed into submission. This is a problem, okay? And monetary authorities know it, and that's why nobody will dare speak of the amount of money that's actually being printed as opposed to the amount they tell us is being printed. So it's verboten. Where have we heard that word before? Verboten. Oh, who might have mentioned that word? Boy, I think it might have been Newt Gingrich when he was talking about who's funding all the leftist activity in America. And when he mentioned a specific name, he was shut down, because that's verboten, not allowed, okay? Because any crack of sunshine that gets cast onto this dark episodic foolishness, you're shut down, okay? Because that's what our media has become. They are the watchmen. They are the people that keep light from being shone on events of monumental concern to humanity. And that's where we're at.
Indeed.
And that's why you have an audience, because you have a flashlight and you know where to shine.
Indeed. And that just makes me think, the Fed's not audited, the Fed's not accountable. Even if they were, we wouldn't get the real books anyway. It's just one complete mess. And I really do appreciate you taking a deep dive into those dark corners there, because I don't understand all those intricacies myself. Switching to gold and silver here, Rob, I just got to say a couple things that drive me crazy real quick if I could. This JP Morgan thing, people are like, oh, $1 billion fine, record fine. And I'm like, well, it wasn't even $1 billion. It was less than $1 billion, right? So that's kind of dishonest. And it was only 6 traders, right? Over 8 years of supposed investigation, it was 6 traders. And people were like, yeah, this is vindication. Yeah, this is, the nail in the coffin. Yeah, the manipulation's coming to an end. I'm not seeing it. That's just one thing that's driving me crazy. Another thing that's driving me crazy, Rob, is, silver. Oh, well, it's just natural that it's got to have a pullback. It can't keep going up forever. Yeah, but crashing 18% overnight, that's not really natural, in my opinion. And then people are like, well, silver's falling because the stimulus hopes are fading. And it's like, well, if the stimulus hopes are fading, that's bad for Main Street, which translates to bad news for Wall Street, which means that people are going to look to move or a flight to safety or a hedge against, market uncertainty and things like this. So that doesn't make sense either. So I just had to get off that off my chest, Rob, and I just want to know, what is your assessment of gold and silver right now, especially with all of this newfound energy and excitement about the manipulation coming to an end?
Well, the manipulation that's being acknowledged or admitted to via convictions in court and fines allegedly being paid, I'm gonna try to reposition it in a slightly different way. What's occurring on that front? The real crux of the manipulation in metals isn't being touched. This is being portrayed to us as we had a CFTC investigation for a number of years into the alleged ill doings of JP Morgan et al. Some years ago. And of course, the CFTC could never find any wrongdoing after years of investigation. But lo and behold, it seems that the Department of Justice, they found they found a pair of stinky shorts in the drawer of J.P. Morgan, and I'm just going to tell you, they have not found the mother lode, or let's just say the excrement that makes shorts stinky. Let's just say they pulled out a pair of stinky shorts and they said, okay, we found it. No, you haven't found it. You just found a pair of soiled shorts. Look a little deeper, and you might find what the real cause of the soiled shorts is, because there's something brown or maybe black that's hiding in the drawer that you haven't pulled out yet, or you haven't had your hands on yet. Maybe you don't want to get your hands on that because it won't smell or look very pretty when you do. But that's the essence of what's really going on. Imagine a scenario, if you will, Paul, where I'm engaged in a massive fraud with money, okay? And I'm creating so much money that it's going to become evident to the whole world real soon. So what do? I launch an investigation, and I tell J.P. Morgan, we're going to find you guilty of doing something, and we're going to fine you $1 billion. We're going to give you the $1 billion under the table to pay the fine, and then we're all going to declare victory that we've righted a tremendous wrong, and then we're going to carry on doing exactly what we've done all along. And I mean, if one thinks about it, that's kind of sort of what's going on in the metals market today. I mean, yeah, we found the guilty party, okay? They've agreed to pay a fine. And of course, it's assumed that they'll never engage in this activity again because they've been caught, they've been found. And yet, metals market remains as manipulated and suppressed as it was, today, as it was a month ago or a year ago. And if anything, the attacks on the metals price, the counterintuitive attacks on the price of metal continue unabated. Okay? Like, there's been no wrong that's been corrected. There's been the acknowledgement that something was amiss. There's been an agreement in I guess for a token fine to be paid, but I mean the activity continues. Markets are as manipulated today as they were 6 months ago, or a year ago, or 3 years ago, maybe worse, because the monetary authorities are acting with more, let's just say, with more desperation, it seems to me. They appear more desperate because their interventions in different markets appear to be reckless. They appear to be even more counterintuitive than ever, and they continue. So, what's happened? I mean, there's been an acknowledgement of something. It's sort of like saying, I saw something. But Rob, what did you? Never mind. I saw something. What does that mean? I saw something.
Exactly. And Rob, that and it makes me think that Bloomberg article that came out, sure enough, I think like in the third or fourth paragraph, that's all I could get through. That's all I could stomach. But in the third or fourth paragraph, it was saying something like, this puts an end to the investigation and this and this and this. So yeah, I do get a sense of that. It's wrapped. Let's move on here. That's it. Go about your day in the markets.
Yeah, I saw something. Next. I saw something. Next. Okay. Yeah.
Now, Rob.
Oh, metals manipulation. Yeah, we covered that. I saw something. Let's move on. Fine was paid. Okay? Over. It's over. Right. It's really over, isn't it? Yeah. Interest rates are still at zero. Stock market is still at record highs. Metal prices are still suppressed. But let's move on. Let's talk about other things now.
Now, Rob, I get a lot of slack for this because for the last couple of weeks, I've been writing about shortages I'm seeing in stores, and all the way, like all these places I'm going to like just the regular stores where a lot of American shops, unfortunately, Walmart, Target, things like this, and various ones. I'm not just going to the same one over and over because I keep seeing empty shelves all over the place. Last year, one of my big concerns was food price inflation. This year, in addition to food price inflation as a concern, it's just the lack of stuff. Simply, my local Walmart has like 5 kids' bikes with training wheels on it, not a bicycle in that store. You know, you look at the linens and the kitchen appliances, the shelves are 33% stocked. They got big items to make it look like the shelves are full, and they're clearly not full. So, you know, I guess the question there is, what is your assessment of food supply, food price inflation, or supply chain disruptions, or what do you see going on just on Main Street when it comes to the markets and society just functioning or not being able to function that much longer?
Well, let's just say where I live in Toronto, we have a next door neighbor who has been waiting for lumber to resurface their deck at the back of their house. They've been waiting for lumber since May, and they don't have any lumber to redo their deck. Let's just say I've been in a couple of big box stores in the last 2 weeks. There is no paper towel available anywhere in Toronto right now, for the most part. You can't walk into a Costco right now or a Walmart in Toronto and buy a paper towel. They don't have any. I have a good friend who has a cottage who is trying to get materials to winterize his cottage. Couldn't buy a heat pump. I tried to buy 2 inner tubes for mountain bikes about a month ago. I went to every location that I could think of in Toronto, all the big chain stores. Can't buy an inner tube for a bike or a top for a bike. I have a subscriber acquaintance who's a veterinary doctor. He was having trouble accessing hydromorphone, which is morphine, which he uses in his practice when he's operating on pets, dogs, cats, whatever. It's a sedative. And that's a basic staple in the medical practice. I have another family member who's involved in the procurement of PPE and the prices of that earlier in the summer. And I haven't actually got an update in the last month, but earlier in the summer, the prices of masks and disposable gloves were up by a factor of like 100 versus where they were in January. It's like specifically, I'm talking about like a disposable mask that had a price tag back in January of 50 cents. These things were trading for $50. So, they're up 100x. Disposable goggles that were $1 in January were selling for over $30. So, and I mean, I buy groceries personally. I buy groceries. I've noticed that the price of virtually anything grocery stores, some things more than others. But I mean, what we're talking about or discussing is supply chain disruptions. And there's been supply chain disruptions across the board. I know how tight the physical metals are because many of the places that produce it have been shuttered. Mines have closed in big mining jurisdictions like Mexico and Peru. I mean, if one person at a mine comes down with COVID, they shut the mine down. The Royal Canadian Mint was shuttered for at least 2 weeks earlier in the year. They're up and running now, but their order flow for physical metal that they produce at the Royal Canadian Mint is 5 times what they can produce. And everything that they do produce is on allocation, which means it's being rationed. And that means, so if you're the biggest dealer for the Royal Canadian Mint, and you put in an order this week that you would request 30,000 silver maples, maybe you get none. Maybe you get 2,000, and try your luck next week. And that's called being on allocation. Okay, it's rationing. It's a rationing of metal. So metal is being refined and is being distributed. But I mean, at these prices, how much longer can this go on? I don't know. Let's just say orders are not being filled on a readily basis. It's like if you're lucky enough to get somebody to sell you metal, you have to be patient and wait for it and then hope it comes. But, that's the state of affairs. And that's across the board in the metals industry. Physical metal is in very short supply, as are many other things, because supply chains have been interrupted, because the economy has been shuttered in so many different facets and different ways. But of course, none of that is consistent with, record high stock prices. Like, why is the stock market continue to go higher? Who's buying all the equities?
Now, Rob, it's weird because everybody's billing this election to be the most, controversial, the most contested. Everybody knows that. Everybody's expecting that. So, like, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, what in the heck happened in Beirut a couple months ago? The alternative media can pick something apart within 48 hours. And sure enough, within 48 hours, half a city got blown up and it was out of the news in 2 days in the mainstream news. So everybody's talking about the election's going to be the most contested thing ever. And I'm thinking, well, there might be some sort of shock and awe, like a 30 bomb or something that takes half of a city, or there could be something that is shock and awe in a sense that it comes out of left field that nobody is anticipating. Pandemic was one thing, right? Everybody was talking about war with Iran, war with Venezuela, war with something, but no, came out with a pandemic. Now everybody's talking about, oh, it's the election. I can see something else happen on a grand scale, something on the size of that Beirut blast, for lack of a better term. So just what is on your radar right now, and what are some of the things that you're concerned about as we end up this last quarter here of 2020, Rob?
Well, you speak of what occurred in Beirut, and the reality about what happened in Beirut hasn't been properly acknowledged anywhere in the mainstream press. There was a radiation spike when that event occurred. In my personal opinion, the radiation spike that was measured, I believe it was somewhere in the Mediterranean. I believe it was Sicily, where they had, measuring equipment, and a very noticeable and extreme spike in radiation occurred when that detonation occurred. That was a nuclear detonation. Okay, I don't know who is responsible for it, but that was a nuclear detonation. And Paul, when nukes are in play, how do you get more extreme than that?
Yeah. How do you prep for that?
Exactly. And how do you prep for it? You can't. I mean, if that kind of stuff is going on, it tells you how far down the rabbit hole humanity's gone, is what it tells you, because that is just the height of, and it's been covered up and nobody wants to talk about it. And that tells you how far we have sunk as a species, that we allow these things to occur. And there's no repercussions. There's no justice. There isn't any, and no one seems to care. At least people who you would assume would care don't seem to. And it's like, just ignore and move on. Like, next. Like, I saw something. Okay, next.
It really is amazing. And, you know, because I think back to that Tianjin explosion from a few years back, and then I think about this, and not only does that blast serve as like a dry run in one sense, but it also serves as the ability to take out.
I think about like 9/11 and 3 buildings falling into their footprints when only 2 of them were struck by planes. You know, and then I think about the absence of plane parts on the lawn of the Pentagon when a plane with titanium engines supposedly vaporized when it hit the wall of the Pentagon. And I mean, these things just don't add up. They just don't add up. Okay, planes don't disappear because they hit a building. You know, engines don't vaporize. Titanium engines don't vaporize on impact. You know, three buildings the size of, the 2 major World Trade Center towers, and then Building 7, which was a 50-story building, and it collapsed into its own footprint. They said because there was a fire. I mean, Paul, think about that.
So what I'm hearing, Rob, is it could get a lot more dicier as we move through the rest of this year. I've been calling this the year of no surprises, but that was what I think I'm getting out of this.
Yeah, and I mean, we're living in Never Land, and what else can happen in Never Land? Use your imagination.
And final question here, Rob. Just quickly, you don't have to go deep down into this question, but, there's also this buzz about this digital currency. And I just wanted to say one thing about this Fed digital currency, and that is, a couple months ago, 70% of the American adults wanted these economic impact payments again. And then just like last week, it was like 90%. So my thinking is, people are wanting this helicopter drop. So if they unroll this Fed digital currency thing where they have everybody with their accounts at the Fed, and then they can deposit money that expires or whatever, it's almost like the people are going to be asking to go cashless and to go digital. And I just wanted to get your thoughts, because I've heard you talk on that before. So is there anything you wanted to add on to that, if that point even made sense at all, Rob?
Well, I believe that humanity is going to be force-fed digital currency, whether we like it or not. Cryptocurrencies are not going away. The world will be more consumed with cryptocurrency 5 years from now than they are today. Interesting analogies that I've heard from different directions. I think I saw a comparison, and I can't even remember exactly who said it, but the comparison was something like this. In 1995, 0.5% of the world had access to the internet. Okay, and today about 60% of humanity is on the internet every day. Okay. Today, roughly 0.5% of people own Bitcoin or a digital currency. What do you think the price of Bitcoin is going to be when 60% of the world has digital currency in a digital wallet? So, I mean, the sky's the limit. I mean, digital currencies are here to stay. They're not going away. The reason why digital currency hasn't been adopted in mass, in my view, is because regulatory concerns were not in place. But lo and behold, what has been occurring in the digital space, in the crypto space, the support structure, which, let's just say, governs the regulatory realm, has been being addressed through smart contracts Ethereum-based smart contracts, that's the infrastructure, okay? You see, we created the traffic without the roads in the digital space, in the crypto space. It therefore required a breather to build the roads, to build the infrastructure. The way I see it and the way I measure it, I reckon that the infrastructure is very close to being completed. And traffic volume will grow. And digital currency is here for good, and it will proliferate. And it will become much bigger than it is today.
Of course, the big risk there is in governments and central banks co-opting it and taking the roads over for themselves.
Well, you see, no. Ultimately, because the infrastructure is being built out, the infrastructure will have, let's just say it kind of like, there will be toll booths, there will be monitoring, and once governments have the prerequisite amount of surveillance or ability to surveil and monitor the new currency, the digital world, then it will be welcomed with open arms to roll out globally. That's what's coming, because that infrastructure is being completed, I believe, right now, or it's been largely completed. It's been an evolution. So we needed the infrastructure in place before the digital currency or the cryptoverse could really expand. But that is all, that's in process. It's happening. And cryptos will be bigger than they are today in 3 years or 5 years, without a doubt. And hopefully the world will wake up from its slumber and recognize that these futures markets that we are using as a price discovery mechanism for metal are completely and utterly false. So I believe metals will ultimately, Paul, get to a point where there will be cash and carry. I don't believe that the futures markets will remain viable for precious metals as a means of price discovery, because they're fraudulent.
I would tend to agree with pretty much everything you said there, except the crypto part. That's good. We'll save that for another discussion. Rob, what do people get out of KirbyAnalytics.com?
Well, you get my insights on the market, and it's been a process. It's been an event. It's been a world. It's a deep hole. Let's just put it that way. Alternative financial reporting is a very, very deep hole, dark hole, rabbit hole. I mean, you can affix many different monikers to what really goes on in our capital markets. I've seen it from the inside, and I've seen it from the outside, and it's an ugly place. I mean, it really is. And I try to make heads or tails of it the best I can, and I try to share my thought with people. And I'm a little bit outside the box in what I analyze and what I think and my views on the market. And but that's the way I'm built. Can't help it.
Rob Kirby, I'd like to thank you for joining us again on Silver Doctors.
Been my pleasure, Paul.